Hi, friends. This is a sermon called Upstairs, Downstairs. It is based on the 18th chapter of Luke, verses 9 to 14, which is the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. And it is being preached on Reformation Sunday, October the 26th, 2025, at Yellowknife United Church. The strangest conversations happen after midnight. 2 years ago this weekend, I found myself sitting across from a very kind nurse. I think his name was Marcus. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. I had been in the emergency room since 5 p.m. I was now being admitted to the inpatient mental health ward. It was a sobering moment when the security guard escorted me downstairs and locked the door behind me. And it was now Marcus's job to inventory my possessions to make sure that I didn't have any contraband substances with me or any hazardous materials. They had already taken my clothes. I was in hospital garb with bright yellow grippy socks, and certain things were confiscated immediately. My cell phone charger, my shoelaces, the drawstring from my hoodie. And Marcus carefully inspected my colored pens to make sure that they weren't too sharp. I got to keep my toothbrush as well as my hair texture powder once I could prove that the white substance wasn't actually cocaine. And I think I realized that I wasn't in Kansas anymore when Marcus held up my travel-sized container of spray deodorant. We have to take this because it could be modified and thrown to make an explosive. He explained this gently. Okay then. How vulnerable I was in that moment, clothed in hospital pajamas, my eyes swollen from crying, having told my story to the triage nurse, the nurse, the ER attending doctor, the crisis worker, and the ER psychiatrist. I was strung out. I was detoxing. I was exhausted. And I vaguely wondered as I sat there how many people had before me had worn these particular pajama pants, which were pilled and stained and kind of rough to the touch. But dear Marcus, he just kept chattering away as he worked as though this was just a normal night, which I guess for him it was. He asked me about my kids and my family and my job, and whether or not I'd like a chocolate pudding cup for a snack. To Marcus, I wasn't a dangerous, crazy person. I wasn't an addict, though I had just been diagnosed with cannabis use disorder. I wasn't Reverend Allison wearing a clergy collar or funeral director Allison in her three-piece pinstripe suit. I was just Allison, a human being who was having a very hard time, same as countless human beings who had had hard times before me. And I remember feeling so incredibly grateful to Marcus, who respectfully gathered up my belongings and then tucked me into the room where I would spend the next 2 weeks. It was a very hard night, one of the hardest of my life, but Marcus never made me feel anything less than perfectly normal. Downstairs, find the mental health ward. Upstairs, you find the temple in Jerusalem. Because no matter where you lived in the city, you always went up to pray because the temple itself was elevated, up many, many steps, built on the highest ground in the city. But one day, as Jesus tells us, there were two men who were very much not on the same level. First, we have the Pharisee, someone who is seen as pious and virtuous simply by definition of his position. He has devoted his life to study and prayer and to strict adherence to the law. And the word Pharisee literally means separated one. So it's no wonder that he sees himself as above the common folk. He prays, God, I thank you that I am not like these other people, thieves and rogues and adulterers, or even this tax collector. And he goes on to list his various credentials. I fast 3 times a week. I give 1/10 of my income. I recycle. I donate my bottle shop money. Of course, he's not lying. He does do all these good things, and they are good things to do. But the trouble is, the Pharisee isn't really praying, he's boasting. He's not talking to God as much as he's talking about himself. What does he need from God anyway? He's already perfect. Somewhere behind, mind you, not beneath, stands a tax collector. Now, here is a man who everyone despises because tax collectors worked for the government. He's a collaborator with Rome. He is a sinner beyond redemption as far as most people are concerned. Tax collectors are in charge of remitting what was owed, but they don't get paid their own salary. They just skim off the top for themselves, and they do that quite liberally. The system permits it. And this man knows how everyone feels about him. And so as he climbs the steps to the temple and approaches, he doesn't lift his eyes and he doesn't defend himself. He just whispers the simplest prayer he can think of. God, be merciful to me, a sinner. Upstairs, the virtuous, downstairs, the reviled. And Jesus says, this man, the hated tax collector, is the one who goes home justified. Now imagine being that Pharisee, having done everything right and hearing this. Imagine being in the crowd of disciples, hearing that lesson, and hearing that the person that you hate most of all, maybe today it's not a tax collector, maybe today it's an ICE official or a particular politician or your horrible boss. Imagine hearing that they are the ones, instead of you, who find grace. This isn't an easy story, I don't think, because we don't like to see ourselves in either the shoes of the tax collector or the Pharisee. Certainly, we aren't liars or cheaters. We'd like to think that we aren't reviled. We live decently. We don't take advantage of others. And we even declare all of our income properly to the CRA. But the Pharisee? Well, we aren't like him either, are we? We don't look down our noses at others. We say hi to folks on the street. We recycle. We aren't prideful or boastful about coming to church every Sunday. So where do we fit in this odd little parable about grace and upstairs, downstairs? Upstairs, downstairs mentalities happen all around us. I think if I'm brutally honest, I have caught myself praying the Pharisee's prayer more times than I would like to admit. Thank God I'm not like them. It slips out so easily, almost without noticing it. Thank God I'm not the one sleeping in an encampment by the museum, having to set a fire to stay warm. Thank God I don't need a joint to make it through the day anymore. Thank God my mental health issues are under control. Thank God I have a job. Thank God I don't have to worry about my next meal. I'm not poor. Thank God I live well, with friends and family supporting me. Thank God I can climb the stairs to the temple to pray. Thank God I'm welcomed into church on Sundays. Thank God I'm not hanging out downtown in front of the mall. We do draw lines, of course we do, between our own virtues and merits and the circumstances of others that we find uncomfortable. I think that we do judge others as reckless or irresponsible or being in messes of their own making. You should have quit smoking, or you should have worn your mask or got your shot, should have lost the weight, should have done those brain exercises, or taken better care of yourself. It's easy to think this way, but the thing is that I've been downstairs. We all have. We know, if we're honest, how fragile it all is, our privileges. We know that we're not inherently better than those whose struggles are a little more obvious or a little less socially acceptable, a little more difficult to understand. We know the truth. We really do. All it takes is one bad day, one accident, one moment of despair, and any of us could easily find ourselves downstairs once again. I think a lot about being downstairs when I hear the tired controversies over certain social services, the ones that we offer to folks whose problems we find distasteful. Like the Pharisees, I think we are very quick to diagnose the moral failings of others as a society. As I thank God this week for 2 years clean of my cannabis addiction, I notice a definite Pharisee attitude towards safe consumption sites, for example. Those places where folks can go to use their drugs safely under supervision with access to the right supports. In Ontario, we are actually shuttering those facilities one by one because nobody wants them nearby. even though we know full well that harm reduction saves lives. Yet the Ford conservatives passed the Community Care and Recovery Act last year, which, among many other restrictions, makes it illegal to have a safe consumption site too near a school or a daycare, which means that 10 of the province's precious 23 facilities have already closed, with no plans to replace them. And recovery and abstinence are now seen as the only viable, proper responses to people who use illegal drugs, which sends a hugely vulnerable population further downstairs, only increasing their risk of unsafe use, contaminated supplies, and overdose without access to medical support. Addiction is a disease, we know this, but yet we treat folks with addictions like reviled tax collectors. We moralize their circumstances and say that they should have done better or been stronger, and we don't help them because we don't approve. And there's that Pharisee mentality at work again. Thank God I'm not like them. This is exactly the kind of judgment that Marcus did not impose upon me that night in the hospital. He didn't ask me to get myself together before he showed me compassion. He didn't tell me that I should have been stronger or smarter or tougher. He didn't act as if I had failed. He just met me where I was, which was scared and embarrassed and in borrowed clothes, tearfully accepting the chocolate pudding. Marcus understood grace. I think he understood the gospel perfectly, even though we didn't talk about faith. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and whoever humbles themselves will be exalted. Excellent punchline, Jesus. It's a great leveler, a vision of grace that imagines that there might not need to be an upstairs or a downstairs, but that in this ideal world we call the kingdom, we might all meet each other right there on the landing. Because here's the thing, the longer we stay perched on our high ground or huddled in the basement, the longer it goes when we can't see each other. And if I can't see you or come to know you, we just grow further apart, and I can't understand what it is you might need. And I can't respond to you in compassion or in grace. Grace is meeting people where they are, not where we think they should be, which is the rationale behind a new safe consumption site that's opening in Courtenay, BC, operated by Island Health and the Solid Outreach Society. And not only does this new facility have safe injection rooms, but it has also developed safe inhalation rooms, which is a brand new technology that recognizes that more and more folks are choosing to inhale drugs rather than inject them. And until now, those users of drugs have been shut out of even the few safe sites that do exist. This new site will save lives because it responds nimbly to the changing needs of a community that is so often ignored and despised. And when we grow to adapt the needs of people as they actually are, not the needs as we imagine they should be, grace enters the picture. These rooms say, your life matters, your needs matter, and we will meet you here where you are. And this, I think, is the bridge that Jesus commands us to build. Not you down here and me up here, but us together coming face to face to respect and love one another as we are. The humble shall be exalted. Today is Reformation Sunday, and I can't believe you didn't get me a card, but 510 years ago, Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the door of the Castle Church in Wittenberg, Germany. Luther himself spent years trying to be the perfect Pharisee. He fasted, he prayed, he confessed, he punished himself, all to prove that he was worthy of God's love. And until one day, he realized that that's not how it works, that he could never be worthy, actually, and yet grace was already his. Grace was just there for him. And that was a revolutionary idea to a church that had built so much of its theology around justification through good works, confession and penitence and piety. These were foundational parts of Christian life. And of course, a church built on that structure inevitably became corrupted through the buying and selling of indulgences and the preying on the fears of the faithful people. Justification through grace alone, and not by works. This is the central pillar of our theology as members of the Reformed Lutheran tradition. And here's what it means. It means that grace cannot be earned by the things we do, nor can it be lost by our mistakes and our omissions. Grace is not doled out by priests or by popes or by Pharisees or even by night nurses. Grace is simply ours, granted by God, showing us that we are valuable and loved no matter what. Because grace isn't a ladder from the righteous down to the broken. Grace is a meeting point, a place where we discover the ground beneath us is level and that God is already there. I'll never forget Marcus, the humble night nurse, the one who made me feel like a person when I was so far downstairs and so very scared. And I'll never forget Martin Luther, whose words are tattooed on my arm, the one who shows me that grace is mine already. Pharisees and tax collectors, I think we're both at times. But Jesus reminds us that we are called to humility and to compassion and to grace for all God's children, wherever we may find each other. So wherever you find yourself today, wherever you find yourself on the staircase, may we be aware of those around us. May we know that we are entitled to grace, and may we not be afraid to climb in both directions. May the grace of God be with you, my friends. Amen.